Trust and believe, dance and be free. Jump in, jump in. Da, 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 There is peace, there is joy, there are pleasures evermore at the river. At the river. You'll find love, you'll find grace when we come to see His face. At the river. Trust and believe, dance and be free. Jump in. Trust and believe, dance and be free. Jump in. Bring your worries, bring your cares. You can leave your burdens there at the river. Get what you need. Trade the sorrows and your pain. There is freedom in His name at the river. Trust and believe, dance and be free. Trust and believe, dance and be free. You can be free. Jump in. The water's troubled. All you gotta do is step in, jump in, dive in. It's safe. The river, just jump in. You gotta jump in. The river, just jump in. Whatever you need, just jump in. The river, just jump in. River, just jump in. The 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 river, just jump in.
What's good, y'all? I am Pastor Justin, and I'm here with my beautiful wife, Denisha. I'm here with my man, Elijah Hudson, and the awesome, amazingly talented Sheba Mitchell. We have all collaborated together for this great event that's coming up for you. We have the not worship, but spirit and flow, y'all.
We have Jonathan Dunn, my brother, my friend. He thinks he's a big deal, but don't tell him that he is. But he's coming to the Capital District to be one of our guests. We want to welcome all music lovers, all singers, all worshipers. Come and hang out with us. Jump in the river as we have this Spirit and Flow night, March 19th, 7 p.m.
Bring your mother, your sister, your brother, your auntie, and them. Bring everybody so that we can have an amazing time. I'm looking forward to March 19th.
Talents. It's been crazy during this pandemic, and so now it's time for us to come together and show out in spirit. We're looking forward to it. 388 Broadway at the Parish Pub.
It's going to be something dynamic on March the 19th. Mark your calendars, 2022 coming at you.
Albany, get ready.
Happy Thursday, everybody. You are here, and it is the time for the deep dive. We are so excited that you are here. We have some exciting things coming for you tonight. We told you last week we had something special, and we absolutely do. But before we get to that point, you know what you got to do. We want you to like, we want you to subscribe, and we want you to share that bad boy. Tag somebody, get your cousin, your auntie, or maybe not your auntie this week, but maybe your uncle this week. But you can get your auntie too. I'm just playing, y'all. We can get everybody in this week, but we want to bring as many men in this week as possible because we got something special for y'all. Ladies, we don't want you to log off. We want you to stay on too, but we got something special for the men this week. We have some amazing presenters with me that are going to be having a great conversation, and we're about to bring them on. So y'all know what it is. Y'all got to like, subscribe, share, get ready to jump in, y'all. So here are my awesome guests. I have the dope preacher man in the building. We got Lewis Pollard.
Man, dope. I don't know if that's the best word I want describing the preacher, man, but it'll work. It'll work. This ain't Frank Lucas up here, but no, I'm playing. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Listen, we are good, and we are so excited to have you both here. And this next gentleman, I call him I want to call him the master teacher, but I know that's the Lord. So he's the one of the craziest professors that I call him Professor Paul, but he don't know it, but that's what I really call him, Professor Paul. Well, Mr. Paul James is here with us as well. Paul, just speak to people for a hot minute.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Lewis. It's a pleasure to be in conversation and community with you, Brother Justin. It's also really good to spend time with you this morning, and I'm just grateful that at the end of the day that you have found something in my words, something in my demeanor that has allowed me to be a part of this invitation. So thanks to both of you. And I have a motto that I live by, and that's no matter whatever setting I'm in, my phrase is I'm still learning.
Okay. That's good. So for those who don't know, you should know this by now, you are in the deep dive, and this month's theme is March Madness. So if you haven't been following, and I told you guys last week about this, so if you haven't been listening, you need to listen this week and pay attention, go back and start watching them again, because oftentimes it's going to be references from previous deep dives. But this one is going to be something special. Women, don't log off. Whatever you do, don't log off, because you're going to need this information too. If your husbands, your cousins, your brothers are around, tell them to log in. Tell them to get on, because this is going to be a conversation very, very important for them. As today we focused on the brothers. So this is the reason why you see I'm flying solo. I don't have my beautiful wife with me today. So this is strictly for informational purposes and to help us, because we are not just the soul, not just the spirit, but we are also the mind. And, we as I said last week, we want you all here at River Freedom, we want you to be whole. And we want you to be complete. We don't want you to be so spiritually minded that you're no earthly good. We want you to be a whole person. And because we want you to be a whole person, we took the time to bring these awesome people here to help us. As we said last week, each joint supplies strength. And we know that these joints here will supply strength not only to myself, but to everybody here. So we are talking about mental health, mental awareness, mental wellness with men. So I guess we have the spirit man, we have the Superman professor, I call him. We want to talk about this. So we're going to dive in. Let's jump in. So I'm looking at my notes. So if y'all see me turn to the side, that's the reason why. No shame at all. So first thing I want to ask, and I'm going to ask this because we also have, when I look at this, we have different generations too, which I think is really dope. We got different generations, so different takes, and all of us have grown up in different times. So one thing that I want to ask, and ask Paul first, and then when Paul is finished, we'll shoot it over to Lewis, is how much did your upbringing affect how you move now? Like how you move, how you handle stress. How much did your upbringing, your specific upbringing, do that?
Well, tremendously, because I believe that we are the sum total of our past and our environments and our communities. So tremendously. I was shaped and groomed by single Black women, literally. No father, no male, no figure of that kind until perhaps my late teens. So that affected me tremendously. And sometimes that effect wasn't so good, and sometimes it was very honorable. But what I'm most excited about in terms of what I know today is, at my age, I value and understand that the people who influenced me were doing the best that they could under those circumstances. Now we're talking about the 70s and early 80s. So at my age today, I tend to give those people a significant amount of grace, because a lot of times you had young people living, making decisions, some good and some bad, but they did the best they knew how.
Right.
And I think that's critically important as I think about my mental health today, my family today, but most importantly, my ability to survive and maneuver in such a way that dignity and integrity are part of that process.
Yeah, in my upbringing, my father and mother, my father was a drug and alcohol counselor. So he kind of had that, let's talk about it, let's discuss it, in his approach to fathering. My mother, just having that mothering nature that she always has. And it was a combination, because I grew up in a little bitty town called Oberlin, Ohio, about 30 minutes west of Cleveland. My mother worked at the college. My father was a, like I said, drug and alcohol counselor at one of the local foster facilities, then went to do drug and alcohol facilitation at the Grafton prison, then was elevated to the chaplain there. But on the other side, I had my grandfather. So we were the only family in Oberlin. The rest of my family was in Cleveland, Ohio. So, I have an uncle who in South Euclid, another uncle lives on Harvard. My Uncle Al moved around as well. So my grandfather was not the complete opposite of my father, but he was a bit more stern and man up. And I like what Mr. James said as it relates to showing the other generation grace, because I now look back on some of the things that my grandfather said to me, and looking it through the lens, right, of what we're dealing with now. He was tough on me because he was trying to say, yo, you live in Oberlin. You interact with a lot more white people than I'm used to. I want my grandson to have some dirt, to have some grit, I understand your parents, raising you, but I want to make sure that my grandson can deal with all of the attacks and darts that at the time I did not know existed as a Black man. Yes. I say that to set up one story I remember. It's funny now. I was confused then. We were out to eat, and we were out to eat, I believe it was Bob Evans. And I asked my mother, I'm like 6 years old. It's crazy I can remember this. I asked my mother to cut my pancakes. My grandfather says, quit being a sissy, boy. You can cut your own blankety blank pancakes. I was like, what? Like, what in the world?
Yeah.
So at the time, I'm like, I don't think I know what he was referencing at 6 years old. Him and my mother got into it for a little bit. So looking back at it, it's like, oh, bro, them was pancakes. Your grandpa's like, man up. At least trace a butter knife. They ain't a steak knife. Man up. Now, could he have said it a little differently? Of course. Could he? But now I could see what Mr. James was talking about. His intent was not to hurt or to harm me.
Yeah.
His intent was to man up, boy. So that's the long version of my father was very much of a let's talk, let's have a conversation. Why are you upset? Why are you angry? And then I had my grandfather, who was a big part of my life, who was go outside and play in the dirt. Hey, I don't care what they say, go and get in the fight. So that was kind of the duality of how I should express my emotions and myself as a man that I grew up with.
So what's interesting about what you said is that what I hear even while you're talking, it's like he had a balance, actually. It may have been a different balance, but it actually was a balance. You had the almost like the sensitive side here and the grit on the other side.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's hard to balance.
Exactly.
Usually hard to balance for men, it's hard to balance those two and not get caught up in one more than the other.
Right.
Because I think one of the things you said, well, I'm so glad you said it, was that man up, man up, man up. I think there are more, and I think maybe because I'm an 80s baby, so around, I think there were more families maybe that time and back that were doing that man up, man. And even there's some still 90s babies that had that man up, man up, man up. But I think that what happens is that man up can change the mindset. If not, it can change the mindset of the things that I'm doing, what I'm going to express, what I'm going to say, what I can say. Because I know sometimes if it's only a man up type thing, like, yo, you need to be stronger than that. It starts to change your mind and starts to change the way you think of things and start to change even how you start to feel. You start maybe to suppress an emotion because that's not a man up trait or a man up quality. And you might go,
And I think that comes with conversation.
Yes.
The reason why I began to understand my grandfather, another funny thing about my grandfather, I was thinking about this. I can only remember one time my grandfather saying, I love you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the great thing about that, because many times people hear that as well. Here's the great thing about that. I never had to ask.
Right. Okay.
Because his action, like it never was and the one time that he said it was when my parents were separated.
Mm-hmm.
It was a weird, awkward, emotional talk with my grandfather, which he was trying to say, are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not, I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you need anything, let me know.
Mm-hmm.
He said it in his grandfather, born, he said it in that way. But we had a conversation and it was, how are you doing? Are you okay? And from that, I can't remember everything, but from that conversation, it hit me like, oh, this is why grandpa is so tough on me. This is why grandpa is so hard on me, because life can hit you with some stuff that you won't expect, and he wanted to make sure that with all that Oberlin College and all that preppy stuff and all that XYZ, that I still had, that grit and that mental toughness to deal with all of life. So that's what kind of helped me put into perspective why, growing up, I had to fight just to fight going over, up to Cleveland. We going to the park. Lou, fight him. Why? What did he do? What did he say? Man, y'all give up. All right, I won some, I lost some. But coming back, grandpa was just happy that Lewis fought. So yeah, it may seem a bit dysfunctional, but I'm so grateful for it. I'm
Well,
so grateful for it.
well, brothers, I don't know if it was definitely, and I'm about to take this in a slightly different angle. It was definitely dysfunctional to the point to where, to the degree to where, as we get older as men, we develop a sense of what was toxic masculinity back then versus compassion.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the situations and things that I were taught as a young boy growing up around Black folk was healthy, whole, and gritty, and based on survival. But as you mature, as you become more in the spirit, as you understand the word community, a lot of that stuff was toxic. Even the way you, Brother Lewis, described having to go to a park and having to fight people for no reason. I'm guessing those people look like you. And see, when we grow up and we can't understand the reason why Black folk and men of color in general can't necessarily figure it out together, a part of it is, not all of it, a part of it is because we grow up in environments that are very, very loving, but also grimy. And by grimy, I mean, we're just asked to do certain things that are against the nature of what it means to be human. And so, and some of us never come out of that. And so you find us lost, destitute, in the system, in jail, on parole, not out of a desire to be in those spaces, because unlike the three of us, our ability to navigate away from those environments isn't as smooth and isn't as easy as we think, particularly around what I call, and what's commonly called in the research, this sense of being toxic and connecting that to our masculinity, et cetera, et cetera. Am I making sense, brothers?
You absolutely are. You hitting it.
Yeah, and I think it's the importance of being able to balance the both, right? And as you were talking, I'm interested to hear your thoughts, Mr. James, on not condoning toxic masculinity, but at the same time building some of that grit and that toughness so that we don't venture too far to the other side of the spectrum that many millennials, in my opinion, deal with when they don't have that grit, which is why they don't stay at a job for more than a 3 to 5 year term, which is why they don't have, they're not getting married. There's just certain things that, you know, part of, I was reading a blog, whatever, about there being so many entrepreneurs that are millennials, and how some of the base of that is not a desire to be in business, but it's in a desire not to have to answer or to have a boss or to be on my own schedule. I got to look that up. So I feel like some of that, what's the word I'm looking for? Some of that, man, what is the word I'm looking for? Some of that appeasing, or some, it's almost like we have to balance and walk on eggshells sometimes because we've been taught, you know, your mental health and you should be treated this way, that we can't take, you know, some of those things. So how do we balance some of that? Because I feel like some of that toxic masculinity was beneficial. If I'm just being honest, what was beneficial, if I'm being honest?
Absolutely. Well, let me just weigh in and say this. A part of what urban settings don't give us naturally is what's natural to our spirit is patience. We want everything now. And when you're in a state of arrested development and you need and you want everything now, patience goes out the window. So therefore, all of our decisions in those settings is based on the immediate situation and the now. Now, some of that is survival, we know, which makes sense, but also some of it is just us being ignorant. But I would say, you know, when you look at this across the generational line, I am all for, and I love when I see young folk, young persons engaging in entrepreneurship and getting out here on their own and making things happen. I just say that in that same space, we need to be modeling to those people what humility and what grit and what patience looks like as you build your empire. And as you build your empire, remember that, as the old folks used to say, the people that you meet up going up is the same people you may meet coming back down. Or maybe
Yeah.
So on one hand, I applaud these young brothers and sisters who are, for the lack of a better phrase, reliving the best mind of Booker T. Washington and Mary McLeod Bethune in terms of business and entrepreneurship. But humility, integrity, and patience, I think, has to be a part of that process. Let me say one other thing before we shift away from this notion of how we grew up and what this mental health picture means for us based on that. Because I'd be remiss if I didn't say something about the fact that the three of us grew up in an America where Black folk had very little infrastructure, except for the Black church. I'm gonna keep it 100% now, except for the Black church and except for barbershops and beauty parlors. Most of us are shaped in Black communities or urban settings where there's very little infrastructure. That leads back to patience for me. We have to understand that in terms of our mental health and our physical health and our spiritual health, when you come out of a broken infrastructure system, you can't expect for the masses of people out of that system to be healthy and whole. And so for me, at my age, I'm just incredibly patient with men who look like me and people in general who come from broken and shattered backgrounds. That's a long journey, my friends. That's a long, lonely journey. And when you throw on drugs, alcohol, social economic difference, racism, sexism, patriarchy, classism, when you throw in all these isms, it becomes a double, triple down effect. And so we just got to have that patience that's so important.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I think that's a perfect lead in. I'm kind of going back a little bit to one thing that Lewis said about conversation. And I think this conversation is necessary and needed simply for what you said, Paul, because we were in broken systems, nothing that we had control over, but they were broken systems. And because of that, this is how we start the healing process. This is how we start, to be able to pour into people the necessary tools to get them to the place of being whole, to the place of being healed. One thing about the conversation that conversation piece, some of the conversations that we've had with, let's say, our older gentlemen, older men, whether it was fathers, grandfathers, older brothers, uncles, some of those conversations often would have you not, or feeling less than, if you cried, if you fell, if you broke, you could have a bone sticking out your kneecap. And they'd be like, boy, suck it up, boy, suck it up. Now, I'm thankful my dad wasn't like that. My dad was logical, like, oh, if he's hurt, if he's crying, he must be really hurt. Like, there must be. And I think I know a lot of gentlemen in my era, when they growing up, you didn't hardly ever, you weren't supposed to cry. Like, if you shed a tear, like, you could be actively getting whooped, and you're like, you're supposed to suck that in, and that was supposed to be the tough. That was you're supposed to be, hard. What is it? And this is probably gonna get a little deeper. We're getting deeper into the waters. What is it that causes? I know we talked about historical backgrounds and stuff, and I think we may get deeper into that with this too. What is it about crying specifically that makes, or should I say, that has has those around us, those older than us, teach us not to do it? Why is that such? Why was that so big? Because that, to me, that was always a big, like, huge. And I know the first time I saw my father cry, and he was always a tough guy to me. I always looked at my dad, and to me, he was the hardest man I knew. But the very first time I saw him cry, it broke me down. And I was probably 30. It messed my whole world up. And I knew at that time it was okay to cry by that time. But I was like, oh my God, he's crying. I didn't know. I was shocked, didn't know what to do, didn't know how to move. So what is it that causes our folks to teach us that it's not okay?
I'm deferring to Mr. James on this one. I'm deferring to
Well, when you come out of, and let me say to the viewers, please have patience with my words, because I believe that no human being can rise higher than their personal library. And if you don't have the knowledge and context and aren't necessarily well read, some of these questions can seem easy and, I'm going to say, softball questions, but they're really layered and very hardcore. We come out of plantation culture in North America. Let's just be real.
Yeah.
We were in bondage. War was declared on the African body. And so as a result of that war being declared on our body, including our minds, we developed what I call ways and norms of surviving. As we moved out of the South, and start settling in these urban project centers, it's sink or swim. It's a brutal world and brutal underworld of anything goes. And so what that breeds over time is generation after generation is a cast of men who can't show emotion, who can't cry, who can't show that they can't be hard at any given moment with other people of color and other Black people, but they don't show that same sense of anger and hardness for men and women outside of our community necessarily. So it's a manifestation and a realization of self-hate. Anybody that's taught not to show an emotion such as crying is shutting down, in essence, a part of their personhood. Crying is a natural way of being human. But environmentally, when you grow up in cultures around, I'm going to say, pimps, hustlers, drug dealing, inconsistencies, layers of chaos, showing signs of weakness means that you are soft, and who wants to be soft and sensitive? It just doesn't work. But see, these are the environments that we come up in. Again, I'm gonna go back to this because it's important, that have very little infrastructure. Infrastructure decides how your community should flow, how it should breathe, how it should behave. Infrastructure doesn't mean that you're perfect. It just means that there's a code of conduct and a way of being human. But if we're taught not to cry, if we're taught to be hard, that's just a manifestation of us being in the country and being within this soil, meaning dirt, and being completely turned inside out against our own humanity. And I'll close by saying this. So I've been to Africa twice. I've been all over the South Caribbean. And, this sense of harshness, gentlemen, hardcore, that's not who we are as African men. That's fundamentally not who we are. That's as a result of us coming up in these chaotic urban settings where it's do or die.
Louis, did you have anything you want to say about that?
A lot. I have a lot. And some of it I'm going to hold on to just because I got to kind of form my thoughts a little bit. But I agree. I agree with a lot of what Mr. James was saying. And I think it goes back to something he said previously and earlier, which is getting an understanding on why we were taught that. Getting an understanding on what was the intent. From what he also said was the intent wasn't necessarily don't cry. The intent was don't let anybody see you in a weak state. Don't let anybody see you in a state that they feel like they've gotten to you, or they've offended you, or their words or their physical assaults have pushed you to a point where you can't take it or you can't stand it. And as a result, tears are now coming out of your eyes. Don't let them see you like that, because we have to understand where that teaching was coming from, right? I don't think it is as prevalent now as it was maybe so when we were children, but that's because our experiences, our realities are totally different than the experiences and the realities of our fathers and our grandfathers who grew up one generation away from Jim Crow. Or it's not, and I think a lot of what we talk about from slavery to Jim Crow, it's not hundreds of years ago.
Right.
It's not. It's not. Foul. Slavery wasn't around when the dinosaurs were here. Although we try to connect the historical context of slavery and Jim Crow and all these. If Martin Luther King Jr. was alive today, don't quote me, but I believe he would be in his 90s, right? So it's not even like he would be this 107. No, he would be the same age as some of your grandparents.
Very good point.
Imagine what we've read about him and his fight and what he stood for. That's who was telling us, don't cry. That's who was telling us, keep that emotion in. You know why? Because when they were raised, that reality was, man, and I may get in trouble, and I know River of Freedom, we are for all cultures and backgrounds and races. So I hope this statement don't get me or y'all in trouble. But they were don't let the white folks see you weak.
That was the mentality.
Yeah, don't do that. So I think when we understand why, it does not make the action right or wrong, but it should empower us with the ability to show grace, right? To show grace and to do things differently with our children. I could probably do better with the showing grace with my son, but I'm tough. I'm a little tough on him. And that's because, even the school he's in now, he's doing great in his grades and things like that. But he's one of a few Black folk over there. So, and that is in the back of my mind as I'm raising him and I'm training him. And I'm a boy who grew up in Oakland. So imagine a young man who grew up in the streets of Cleveland and now has that to their grandson. So I think of course men can cry, but I think the foundation of that push was do not let society see you weak. So yeah.
So I want to float in segue right into something still regarding emotions. So let me ask y'all this, and I know how I feel about this, but is it not that much more important now because we're all fathers on here, 3 of us, we all have sons. Is it not that much more important that we show our emotions to them? We actually display it so they can see an actual example of strong and still sensitive, of I can care, but I can still do what I got to do. Is that not, because I know, and this is kind of different for me to even talk about this on here, but I know for me there was a situation that happened with me and my oldest son, and I remember not even faking it, not even playing it, like I broke down. And both of us held each other and we just cried. And in my mind, I was thinking, I first thought was like, man, like this is really hurting. Like, he sees me. And there was a little part of me that was like, he's seeing his daddy cry. I hope he don't think I'm a punk. It still was a part of me, even though I knew he knew that he was hurting. I knew that I was hurting. And I was like, I have to, but I still got to show him. I still have to, we talk about like showing him the way, so to speak. Like, it's okay if you feel this emotion to actually release it, as opposed to holding it in and it turns to bitterness, turns to hate, it turns to malice, it turns to all these other things, and then can start displaying itself in your behavior. And I was like, oh man. So how important is it that we show the examples? That's the question. I kind of got sidetracked because my brain started thinking about it, and it was really kind of rolling. But what is the way, or what is the best way? Is it by examples, or are we by our personal examples, or are we going to use the things that we were taught prior only, or are we going to fuse it? What's the best way to do it?
I think that comes down to the principle of eat the meat and spit out the bone. I think that there are some lessons that we learned, that we could definitely instill into our children. My children have only probably seen me cry twice. One was one of my good friends had passed away. And it was just one of those like, Daddy, you crying? Yeah, Daddy's hurt. Like it was like, my friend just died, and this does not feel good, buddy. I can't remember my children's. I would be lying. I would be making something up. I can't remember what the response was, but I remember at least thinking it's okay to see me cry like this, because death is something we all have to go to. Right. The other time was it was just a rough part of my life. That was just a frustration. Like, man, ain't nothing working. So yeah, I'm not saying that we need to be crying with our children every day. But I think that in those moments, right, where it's in a genuine or an authentic cry, I don't think there's anything wrong with them seeing you cry. Now, it is important that we do teach and show our children that there are moments where I'm frustrated, right? Mm-hmm. There's moments where I'm upset. Hey, buddy, not today. It's been a long day at work. There's a lot going on. Daddy has to get some stuff. Like, so I have those, okay, so that they could see the pushing through. And then I normally kind of follow back up on those days at bedtime. Hey guys, I love you so much. It was a long, so I kind of enforce, but I do think that it's a balance in that. I'm not going to suggest anybody leave this saying, every time I'm sad, I'm gonna go cry with my children. No, I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy either. But your children seeing you cry at those high moments, I don't think anything's wrong with that. I'm gonna let Mr. James speak.
Well, I want to say the answer is yes. We need to be role modeling vulnerability.
That's a good word right there.
Capital V. And I want to call on the spirit of the ancestors who gave us this concept of Ma'at, M-A-A-T, harmony, balance, righteousness, and order. They gave us that concept, which was a feminine concept, because they understood in all the things that we do, we should be seeking Ma'at, harmony, balance, righteousness, and order, including role modeling vulnerability across the community, across the infrastructure. And so part of that is understanding that me showing vulnerability is not about being able to shed tears. It's about dealing with the balance of when to be soft and when to be hard. And that includes sometimes shedding tears. But again, gentlemen, because we have been hit over the head for 400 years, we're living in this space and we're running 100 miles without understanding, even when we have education and even when we're learners, who we are. And so, of course, we should cry in front of our children. Of course, we should role model that. But of course, we should be vulnerable. Even the lion, who is the king of the jungle, knows how to be vulnerable within his pride. Within his pride. So I just don't mean to be so simplistic, but it's natural. My son is 19 years old now. Of course, he has seen me be vulnerable over the years. Not just in terms of tears, but the way in which we maneuver about in the house, the home, the community, et cetera, et cetera. So that's long-winded, but I hope I'm being as clear as possible, family.
Oh no, you are, and my brain just told me this. So, just for those who, and I know some people really need this, y'all need a scripture, right? So, God has not given you the spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. So that's scripture base for this. That's just in case y'all needed it. Y'all might have said, you know what, they've been talking all this time, and they ain't used one scripture. Well, that's gonna be your scripture for the day, y'all. Love, power, and a sound mind. And the sound mind is the part that we often don't talk about. We always talk about love and power.
Good point.
Love and power. But that sound mind is just as important as the other two. And without that sound mind, those other two will get lost in the shuffle. They'll easily get lost in the shuffle without the sound mind. And that piece about vulnerability, I'm glad you brought up, because that's going to segue us right into the next thought. The vulnerability. So I know, and I know each one of you guys know people who have had some serious traumatic experiences. Some serious have been entrenched in some real trauma. Not like I stubbed my toe and now every time I look at a table, I think about my toe getting stubbed. Not that type of trauma. But we're talking about like I know people who were taught at a young age, like at 13, how to be a womanizer. Like I know, and I know, just talking to different people, some of the things that they've dealt with, and some people who have not only been taught that, but have watched, mothers be killed in front of them. These traumatic things, these things that weigh, that sit on us, that you can't handle. You really can't handle. What would you say? And this one's probably going to be a little deeper. What would you say, and how would you help that person deal, or what steps would you want them to take to deal with that trauma, that mental anguish? Because that's what it is. It's almost like gangrene going through, and each thing is spreading. Growing up, I hear about gangrene. I had a grandparent who lost toes because it spread. And trauma and those type of stresses, if not dealt with, will spread just like that till things start dying. And that's when emotions start dying and different things start dying. So how or what suggestions can we give our gentlemen, our men, to not end up in that state of gangrene?
Wow, Brother Lewis, you want to kick off?
My answer is super simple. I'm gonna put the pressure on Mr. James. Have a conversation about it. I know I said that earlier, but that may not be what you wanted to hear. But because out of conversation eventually comes honesty, and I think that's what we kind of need to get to. Which is, Mr. James hit on this earlier about the barbershop, which is great conversation, but rarely is the truth exposed because we all kind of one up each other in the barbershop. But if you're dealing with a high drama, a high stress situation, talk to, if it's not a mental health therapist or professional, of course, that's what we, man, just talk to somebody. Because sometimes as you begin to talk and express yourself, you'll kind of stumble upon the truth that will set you free, right? So, you know, make sure it's a trusted person, a trusted individual, nobody who's going to take that information and come around and use it against you later. But I don't really have a great answer for that, man. But, you know, to let it not spread, you got to get it out. You got to have a conversation with somebody about it.
Yeah, let me just pause for a moment and notice something that is occurring here between the three of us that's overwhelmingly positive. I'm noticing that we each have a constant smile on our face. And I want to call that out and call that up because we're in community.
Yes.
And see, sometimes we have forgotten how to role model being community in the absence of competition. See, that's the other thing. We grow up in very insular, competitive environments for no reason, right? And I'm not just talking about basketball and football and music and entertainment. Just to be in a conversation sometimes in urban setting is a competition. So I just want to call that out, that I'm honored to see the smiles on our faces and the support that we're showing each other. Trauma for me is, the younger you are, I think that for those who are listening to this, you have to understand, and I know this is going to sound very easy, but if you're in a trauma situation, you need to hear and know it's not your fault. Let me repeat that.
Yeah.
To the 8, 9, 10-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-old who's listening to this, or may see this in months to come, if you're in organized trauma right now, it's not your fault. Sometimes we come up in these chaotic situations and we internalize.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Let me stop you real quick. Can you explain what that is? Because I love that phrase, but organized trauma. Explain what that is so that maybe somebody who's listening or tuned in can be like, oh, I didn't know I was in said. So, and I mean to cut you off, but I think that phrase was so good. I think I know what you mean, but there may be some watching who need just some clarification on that, because I'm letting you know now I'm still in that phrase. So I'll still offering.
So thanks, my man. So organized trauma is when you're in a system that appears functional, but causes a great deal of pain. A system where there's a lack of outward love, a system of violence, a system of being over-sexualized, a system of being violated, but you're told to keep it moving or keep it real, as we hear in hip hop culture. Organized trauma is being in a tornado, but not knowing you are until somebody plucks you out of that tornado and says, stop, look, and listen to what's going on around you. Nothing about your setting is producing peace and happiness. You are surviving and not thriving.
Yeah.
And so that becomes the big difference, Brother Lewis, in terms of what I call organized trauma. You can look healthy. You can have money in the bank. You can have a nice car. You can have all those things that make it appear that you're doing very well, but you're in a traumatic situation. And sometimes it can be hidden and sometimes it can be seen. It can be all types of verbal abuse or physical abuse, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, does that make it a little more clear, bro?
It does. It does. And I was kind of in that vein already, but I just wanted to make sure that
Sure.
we didn't skip. Oh, that was some meat. And I don't like when we hear meat and we skip over it. I like to let it stew for a little bit.
Right. Okay. So just really quickly, back to the trauma piece. It's not your fault. And I personally came out of organized chaos. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I realized it wasn't my fault. It was environmental.
Right.
But it wasn't until I was 30s that I figured this out, that this was just environmental. And then once I got in my 40s and started understanding, I needed to unpack some things. And here's where I'm going to sound really instructive now. And I'm asking for the patience of God, the creator, here when I say this. unpacking these things and begin to understand what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
The earlier we can find out what happened to us in life that causes us to have certain behaviors, the more we are able to break those generational cycles and curses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in my 40s, case in point, that's when I finally figured out that I actually needed someone to talk to about things that happened to me at 12, 13, 14, 15.
Mm-hmm.
Never too late, my friends. Never too late. But sometimes I sit and wish I would have went that way much earlier. But again, Black culture, Black people, people of color in general, don't have a healthy appreciation early enough to what I call clinical counseling. And Pastor, I'm gonna lean on you for this, Brother Lewis. We've got to get Black folk and brown folk to understand that the church serves a purpose. And I want you to correct me, Brother Lewis, if I'm wrong here. It serves a very unique purpose. The church does, the synagogue does, the mosque does. But there are certain things that we need in life, like clinical counseling from trained professionals, that we can't necessarily get in the house of worship. And so we need to understand the full depth and breadth of how we take advantage of society. Am I making sense, Brother Lewis? Help me with this from a purely church or religious institution standpoint.
So what I agree, where I would not even disagree with, where I would change the wording a little bit, is not that the church's responsibility can't help out in some of these issues. I think it's where the church has to, so where you would say community, I would say the body. Because many times when we look at how the church meets the needs of the people, that is all on one person, which is the pastor.
Righteous.
So the church should be able to give
Yes.
that clinical counseling and therapy. It just should not be the pressure of the pastor to provide all of that, which is why we need to embrace the body of Christ.
Yes.
So that the pastor can say, I've gone to school, I have some training, I have some very basic pastoral counseling classes, but per our conversation, I want to recommend you to our pastor of counseling, or I want to recommend you to our executive pastor who has a degree in clinical counseling, because what you're dealing with is not just demonic, it's generational. So in order for us to set you free in this particular area, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to pray for you, I'm going to believe God for your total healing, and I'm going to exercise the power of the body.
Yes.
And because of that, I have hands. I need you to send you to somebody who knows how the brain works, how the brain functions. And because of that, I think the Black church can fill that void. They just need to take the pressure off of the pastor being the individual who can fulfill all that. We need school teachers. We need therapists. We need scientists. And I think what we have to do to make this conversation healthy is to make the church understand our greatest strength is not our pastor, it's our body. Because when we tap into the body of Christ, we can have a pastor and a therapist and a school teacher and an entrepreneur. We can have all that in the body and be successful.
Wow. Now, let me say this, brother. When we talk about an African-centered paradigm, one of the things that we say that is sometimes the right question isn't asked, so you don't get the right answer. And so, Brother Lewis, I just want to say that answer was crystal clear. I'm grateful. I'm appreciative. And when you heard me talk about leading with the spirit of I'm still learning, I don't know that I've ever heard it that clear in terms of your language around the body of the church the body of Christ, the body of our humanity. You hit a home run with that, brother.
Oh, that was perfect. And we're going to be closing soon because I know we're running on our time. But that one line, the one liner, each joint supplieth strength, and that's the body.
Mm-hmm.
The head can't do it all. The head can't do. The brain can't do what the hand can do. The hand can't do what the feet can do. Yeah, do people adapt? Yeah, but if you have everything in that body, why are we adapting? Why are we adapting if we have everything in the body? So that was perfect. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. And I want to be mindful. You know, we try to keep it within a certain window, and we may have to do this again because I thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm not going to lie, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm sure the people have, and I want to thank my good brother Lewis and my good brother Paul. I really, really appreciate you guys. You guys have any last things before we close today?
Man, I just want to start off by saying thank you to Pastor Justin, Pastor Denisha, just for this invitation to engage in this conversation, which is so needed. I think anybody that knows Pastors Justin and Denisha understand that this is kind of their niche. This is what makes River of Freedom a little different, because a lot of other churches are not having these conversations. And I think they don't have these conversations because it's not a strength for them to address. But when you look at Pastor Justin, Pastor Denisha, it's just not a conversation, but they have the tools needed to assist in this area. So I just want to say thank you for inviting me and allowing me, but also thank you for fulfilling the void in the body that relates to mental health and how we can address that particular issue.
Well, and I'll just be really brief and really quick. I just want to say that looking at you two men, I'm constantly reminded that your spots and your places in paradise have been secured. So keep doing what you're doing. Keep living, keep breathing, and keep seeking excellence. But I want you to know that as men on this planet, in spite of your faults, your place has been secured. Your footsteps are already heard in paradise, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Awesome, awesome. Again, we appreciate you both for joining us on today. Everybody who is watching, if you are in the Capital District area, or if you're not and you want to travel, March 19th is just a couple of days away. You can join us at 388 Broadway, Parish Pub at, in Albany, New York. That is our Spirit and Flow night. And you can catch us every Thursday here for Bible study and every Saturday morning and the prayer call. So we love you. We appreciate y'all. Y'all have a wonderful night. Peace.
Thank you.